Well, that was a good start to the day, wasn't it? Butterfingers as usual. Um, um, I'm Keith Hayes. This is Mirador Television, and we're broadcasting from the shadow, shall we say, of Lewes Castle in East Sussex, and Lewes being the county town. And I always come to the castle when I think that we're talking about freedom and democracy, because the castle, which I'll show you in a moment, just to those who haven't seen it remind, is where part of the Battle of Lewes took place in 1264. 1264, a long time ago. Indeed it was. But the significance of it was that it was the first spark of democracy in England. Magna Carta had been signed about 50 years before, but the Battle of Lewes was where the barons actually established some form of parliament as a result of defeating Henry III. Sorry if we're a little shaky. So I always think that this is the spark of democracy as we know it, although of course at the time we wouldn't have understood that wasn't a democratic process, but it started to test the divine right of kings. It started to test the fact that the power should be invested all in one man. And across the road, not very far from here, is Bull House, where Tom Paine then wrote, or at least thought up, his Rights of Man thesis, which took the democratic process even further, and in fact ended with the revolution, War of Independence, whatever you want to call it, in the United States. So there is a fair amount of democratic thinking that was inspired by just this little spot. And why don't I just show you, if I may, where some of this took place. That Barbican was a late addition to the castle. Not absolutely sure that it would have been here, the Battle of Lewes. But this castle most certainly was, because it was built by the de Warens, who were part of the invasion of the Normans in 1066, along with William the Conqueror. So that castle, although it is not a big castle, is one of the oldest in the United Kingdom, and there's a certain amount, a reasonable amount, preserved. The mound was put up by the Saxons. It's a man-made mound. It's, I think it's called a motte, M-O-T-T-E. And when you think of all the effort that must have gone into putting that, with the fact is that the tractors didn't run on electricity or petrol in those days, so they had to shovel it by hand, and to put it up is quite remarkable, quite something. But mostly the Baron's men ended royalist resistance by attacking the last of de Varennes' men who were holed up in the castle, and put up a very brave fight, I'm told. So the history books have it. And when I say the history books, I mean contemporary accounts. Now, I'm just going to walk down here, because not too far away, in fact quite close, is on Lewes High Street, which saw its own share of bloodshed. Let's steady the boat. Bailey. Because I wanted to sneeze, so do forgive me. On this high street, the blood was shed because the Baron's men poured through the walls of the town, which weren't too far from here. And if you can see just in the distance there, perhaps by the red light, you can see the red traffic light, is exactly at that point is Bull House. And that's where Tom Paine lived and worked as a customs man, which is a pretty dangerous occupation in those days, because the gangs of smugglers roamed east almost at will. authorities had great difficulty in dealing with them, and they were very violent, and they were not averse to murder. And in one instance, the gang called the Hawkhurst Gang, which actually Hawkhurst is in Kent, but it's right on the border, poured over into East Sussex, and they took on the army at Robertsbridge. So that's how they powerful they were, and Tom Paine had to put up with that. But in between, he wrote The Rights of Man, and he was the man who coined the term the United States, according to historian Bill Bryson. But he also coined the term. He said once in going to Westminster, there should be there a chamber for the common man, called the House of Commons. If that rings a bell, God bless you, you're a Democrat. No. There we go. Pushing the wrong buttons this morning. It is a bit chillier this morning. I mean, just so that you can see, the sun over the downs there. Perhaps you can't see. No, you can't. But mad this morning. The sun over the downs there is covered with some cloud this morning. Yesterday it was absolutely brilliant. This morning it's chillier and cloudier. Anyway, enough rambling about those sort of things, because the reason that we're here. No, this really doesn't want to work this morning. There we go, hopefully. The reason that we're here is partly because the democratic process started, but also it's election day. And it's an election perhaps we didn't want, but it's an election that is here to stay. And I think that one of the things that we have to do is to make sure that we get out there and vote. Now, one of the things that is disturbing about this election is that it's been fought, because nobody expected it. It's been fought in the main on social media, and the misinformation that's poured out has been quite enormous. I've looked at some of the claims that have been made, particularly about Nigel Farage, but about others as well. Not many of them bear much. Basically, an enormous number of people have taken one little scrap of information about people in various parties and then managed to add on all sorts of things that they would think somebody like that would do, rather than any evidence that they do. Now, none of us, I mean, I'm in the media. It's my job to investigate some of these things, so I have, well, I haven't. I've just investigated one or two claims, and I've spoken to people that I know in London, in the city. I've spoken to seasoned journalists and so on and so forth who have a little giggle about some of these things, but of course then once we've had the giggle we realise just how serious they are, because it's more or less people can say whatever they want just to substantiate their point of view, and that's exactly what's happened in many instances in this particular election. But the average voter doesn't have time, so therefore, to some extent, they look at social media and they say tut tut tut. And it is quite remarkable that, you know, and people lay down silly challenges like, can you give me one good reason why? Well, of course it's not that sort of debate, for God's sake. It's not black and white. It's not a form to fill in. This is a very complex issue about a very complex organisation, the European Union, which in itself is very controversial right across the continent. We seem to think that we're the only people, the Brits, who have questioned what it's all about. There are huge questions right across Europe about the European Union. And I'm not saying you should vote to support it or vote against it. That's not the point. But it needs to be investigated. It needs to be looked at. What are we voting for or against? Well, I'll tell you that the fundamental thing is can it work? And that's the question I think that every voter has to ask. Never mind who's involved or whether it gets odd characters. Every party gets odd characters. Every organisation gets odd characters. The prime question is, will it work? Now, if you really want to see some people who supposedly would be in the know is Mikhail Gorbachev has quite a bit to say about it. Oh, Russian, you say. Yeah, but a Russian of some considerable reputation, international reputation, who has his view on it. George Soros, whom many say, oh, Soros, yeah. Ooh. Well, once again, he's an individual who understands what it's all about, and he switched his position. Now, I'm not telling you what Gorbachev's position is, and I'm not telling you what Soros' position is. Go look for yourself. But the fact of the matter is those people who just blithely put out stuff on social media manage to ignore the views of people of substance. There are a good many economists who, okay, they make a lot of money. Does that alter their view? Well, of course it does to some extent. Any gravy train it can alter your view about anything. But the fact of the matter is that a number of people in the city who really have to call the shots on behalf of vast amounts of money put in by investors, and if they get it wrong, their heads are on the block, and that's them gone. They've offered their views, and those are the sort of things that are fairly easy to find. Listening to what I say, or what the person next door says, is on social media, because they emotionally for or against something, really isn't a way to vote. I don't suppose many people will see this morning, and if they do, they shouldn't pay too much attention to what I say. I'm a journalist. I think that perhaps I've had more experience than most, so that I can make up my own mind. But I don't expect people to pay any attention to what I have to say unless they can prove that what I say has substance and is something they should take regarded when they go to vote. Anyway, enough of that, because you can go and should go to the polls today. It's going to be interesting to see whether the pollsters, the people who run surveys, get it right. They've been predicting that Nigel Farage's Brexit party will streak ahead, but then the polls have been known to be dramatically wrong in the past. Will they be this time? Well, we don't know. We won't know until the votes are counted, and I think that probably it'll be tomorrow before we really get a definitive picture. But there we go. Theresa May is said to have come under fire and to be asked for resignation date again, and has managed to not do it. Her party really is in tatters. So that's one outcome of this particular election. This particular issue is probably a Prime Minister for whom I had some considerable regard. And in talking to people actually who work in Westminster, although they're in the bubble, they have some regard for her as well. But that seems to have slipped away because she has been extraordinarily stubborn. Far more, I think, than Maggie was in her day. So that there are problems there as well. Well, now one last note is I'm very lucky today. I'm being taken to Rules Restaurant. Rules is the oldest restaurant in London. It's quite delightful. It's been running for about 200 or 300 years, and the waiters still wear the white aprons, and the food is excellent. The atmosphere is tremendous. But in past days, when I worked for Reuters, if they had a special private function, they would take one of the upstairs rooms. And upstairs, there are photographs of Edward VII and Lily Langtry. I think it's Edward VII. I hope I'm not blackening some king's name. But before he became king, that is where he would meet her. And they both put signed photographs, given signed photographs of Rules, which are now up on the wall there. So here they are having an affair and giving people photographs to make sure that it's not forgotten. But I always get a very strange feeling to think, when I look at the carpet there, is that he and Lily Langtry, the famous actress, romped around on the carpet, and I'm standing just exactly where they romped. I know is that a very odd thing? If it is, perhaps I'm reflecting what some people think of the Brexit Party. But anyway, go and vote, and we'll meet tomorrow and we'll discuss what's gone on. Until then, toodle pip.